Hi, it's Jan Hansbach here. In this video, we're going to look at the octatonic scale. The octatonic scale is an 8-note symmetrical scale. And it's symmetrical because it is made up of recurring sequences of intervals. This scale can be used in many different ways in composition and improvisation. It can also be analyzed in different ways in terms of its application in many great compositions, so there's an extensive lexicon. However, in this video, my main focus is its use within the jazz vocabulary. There are two octatonic scales, Mode 1 and Mode 2. Mode 1 starts with an intervallic distance of a tone followed by a semitone, tone, semitone, tone. Mode 2 is made up of semitone, tone, semitone, tone. In jazz, these scales are referred to as the diminished whole half step and the diminished half whole step. Whole step, half step, whole step, etc. And then the half whole step, diminished. So really the octatonic and diminished scales are the same thing, but it depends on the application and the type of analysis that has been conducted. This really determines whether we call it an octatonic or a diminished scale. For context, I'm going to provide a very basic and brief overview of its development, evolution, and subsequent use within the jazz vocabulary. An early example of its use can be found in Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker, specifically the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. In the extract, you can hear alternating dominant seventh chords, D7, B7. Now, as written, it's D7, B7, and of course the intervallic distance between D and B is a major 6. But if we invert that interval, we get a minor third. So if we think of it momentarily as a B7 to D7, we have that minor third. Those notes, if we look at them very carefully, we see that they're derived from the octatonic scale. It's actually the D octatonic mode 2, because it starts with a half step, tone, half step, and so on. In the early part of the 20th century, the scale became more prevalent within compositions. Composers like Rimsky-Korsakov, Stravinsky, Debussy, and Messiaen used it more consistently in their compositions. In fact, in 1944, Messiaen published The Technique of My Musical Language, and within this publication, he discusses the 7 modes of limited transposition.
Ceci, moi, me semble un oranger dans lequel il y a tout de même des pointes de bleu. Le bleu et le vert, c'est froid, oui, mais c'est l'oranger qui domine.
Within these modes of limited transposition, we find the octatonic collection. This is the second mode. These modes were used as a compositional resource. One of my favorite Messiaen compositions is Poème pour me, which consists of a collection of poems set to music. The pieces are riddled with the octatonic scale, but it's done in such a creative way. One of my favorite poems among this collection is number 5. It's called L'Épouse. And it's just got some wonderful harmony. It's absolutely gorgeous. So when did jazz musicians start using the octatonic scale? Well, there is no definitive date, obviously. We can make an educated guess that it evolved over a period of time and used more consistently as we get to the late 50s and early 60s, not just in improvisation, but within compositions too. know that Charlie Parker was a fan of Stravinsky and Edgar Varese. He was seen carrying these records around. There are fragments and ideas that are integrated into his playing. When you hear phrases like, I love that story where in 1951, Parker was playing at Birdland in New York, and Stravinsky came to the gig. And Parker's on stage and he notices that Stravinsky sat at this table and starts quoting the Firebird. And Stravinsky got very excited and was enthralled by the fact that this great saxophonist had quoted one of his compositions. I just find that a remarkable story. It seems just irreconcilable to have Stravinsky and Charlie Parker in the same room and appreciating each other's abilities, you know. Because classical music ideas had been integrated into jazz, this expanded the vocabulary. It became more advanced harmonically and melodically, and people like Charlie Parker really instigated this push for a deeper understanding of what could be done within an improvisation setting. You know, what kind of scales and melodic ideas could you integrate into the jazz vocabulary that hadn't been integrated to such an extent prior? Now, Charlie Parker wasn't the first to integrate classical music. Take Duke Ellington. He was well aware of classical music. And if you listen to some of his music, particularly his harmony, it's really interesting. So Parker wasn't the first to integrate classical ideas into jazz, and nor was he the first to integrate chromatism. You know, this had been going on in the swing era. Of course, Louis Armstrong, one of the first great jazz soloists, if you listen to his solos, he's using things like flat nines and chromatic, and playing around with the tonality. You know, Charlie Parker just took it to the next level. It was the next step to take in jazz, is to borrow from Louis Armstrong and all the great jazz musicians and composers and just build on that. And this is what Charlie Parker did. And he opened the door really for musicians thereafter to build on that and expand the vocabulary of jazz. So the octatonic scale, well, first of all, you can hear fragments of it in solos from the 1950s, particularly when we get to the late 50s and early 60s. But eventually it became more of a consistent improvisatory device. It was used more extensively in solos. It wasn't just a fragment here or there. It became sometimes a feature of the solo and even became an integral part of compositions. When Afro-American Sketches by Oliver Nelson was released in 1962, we realized that the octatonic scale is not solely used for improvisation, but can also be used within composition, within jazz composition. And one of the pieces on that album, called Jungle Air, starts off exclusively using the octatonic scale. Descending octatonic pattern. After the first four notes, another brass instrument enters, playing the same thing the trumpet plays, and sort of creates this canon. You know, each subsequent instrument builds this, these multiple harmonies. It's a classic octatonic pattern that's used quite often. In fact, if you reverse it, you get another common pattern. And the root note is B flat, so all that is played over the B flat, which suggests the half whole tone, the half whole step diminished scale, or the octatonic mode 2. Another example of its integration into composition is Jaco Pastorius' Opus Pocus. Because of the nature of the octatonic scale, because of its symmetrical structure, it's very difficult for us to perceive a tonal center. It seems to be forever suspended with no tonal home. What composers do, and improvisers too, is integrate it, use it sparingly in music that does have a tonal center. Now that little dyad that he plays is quite revealing in a sense. To think of it as a D flat minor, you've got the minor third and the major third at the same time. So it's already hinting at the octatonic. So it goes up to the flat 9, flat 6 down to the 5th. And it's here that it goes into the octatonic. E flat major, B flat major, sorry, not E flat major, E major, B flat major. Which is implying the D flat half whole diminish, or the D flat octatonic mode 2. So he's alternating between the minor pentatonic and the octatonic, which is a really cool sound and a very efficient, economical way to use it. Another really interesting character that you find in music sometimes is where the intervallic structure of the octatonic scale is maintained, but not necessarily the harmony. So what I mean by that, you could take the intervallic structure of the octatonic mode 1 scale. So tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone. And build chords, any type of chord that you want, that adheres to that intervallic structure. So for example, I could take a C major 7. And move it up in by tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone, semitone, tone. You can do this with any chord. I love that. I love it when you can get a really beautiful, lush sounding chord and move it around symmetrically. There are 3 examples I want to look at. The first one is by Larry Carlton called "You Gotta Get It While You Can." Really nice groove and great playing. The melody is just basically a D minor pentatonic. But the way the chords move, the intervallic sequence is down a minor third, another minor third, and minor third again. Now, this type of motion is just brilliant. It really has a fantastic sound. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Debussy, where particularly in a piece like Je, where he has those, augmented chords moving around. They're moving around in major thirds. But Debussy does that in a lot of his compositions. So again, it's the classical influence. I'm not saying that Carlton is necessarily borrowing from that piece exclusively, but it's the idea, it's the concept of this parallel motion. So after that, it goes back to the, and there's a little breakdown in the guitar. When we get to this, it becomes more extensive. Minor third, minor third, minor third. So those fourths are moving up by minor third intervals. Now, much like Opus Pocus by Jaco Pastorius, there's a tonal center, but what Carlton's doing is flitting between that tonal center and playing outside, using the minor third intervallic distances as a creative device. And it's really clever the way it's done here. So there's a hint there of the, and when we get to the end of the phrase, another example I wanted to look at was a piece by Barney Kessel. It's called C minor. C minor is in SEA. And the tonal center is C minor, obviously. And I like the phrase that happens here. You've got a melodic statement that is clearly in C minor, but then it sort of deviates into this and what's happening here is the fourths are a prominent feature again, but and the minor third distance there, implying that sort of diminished octatonic thing. But it moves up a semitone, so we're in C minor. It's almost like a side step. So we're still in C minor at this point. He's got F, B flat, E flat. That's when it goes out. Back down a tone and up a minor third. So there's a little bit of symmetry there. Upper minor third, down a tone, upper minor third, down a tone. So although it's not strictly octatonic, it's borrowing from that, that intervallic structure. So in Carlton, and in this one. Now this example is by Corea. It's from a track called The Endless Night and appeared on the 1977 album Music Magic. And this little section really is quite special. Absolutely brilliant. The intervallic movement there is moving down a semitone, up a minor third, down a semitone, up a minor third, down a semitone, up a minor third, and again. So these excerpts show us how creative you can be with the scale, and not just the scale, but the intervallic structure of the scale. As I said, it doesn't necessarily have to abide by the harmony of the octatonic scale. You can simply take the intervallic structure of it, you can permutate it, and create these interesting musical ideas. So that's it this time round. I hope you found this interesting and now have a better understanding of the octatonic scale. And I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.